So there are so many ideas kind of swirling in my head this evening. And kind of what I'm finding it boils down to is John Paul II is such an inspirational person. There are some things that are kind of preserved in generational history. So, for example, my dad was immediately born in Poland, and then I guess on my mom's side, it's more like a second generation type of deal. But like, there's a lot that's preserved there, and that's very much the experience of many Americans. Maybe not all Americans, and maybe less and less Americans though. But America has always been this like melting pot, right, of people from different countries with their own experiences, always leaving their countries and appreciating, valuing the opportunity and the freedom that our country has had here in the United States. But one of the things that was very much preserved in my generational history was just what happened in Poland, especially in the 1980s. So there's a lot that went on there, and it's such a cool history. John Paul II is very, very much part of how that climaxed. But so in the I think it was 1937, Poland was first occupied by Nazi Germany. And then after the war ended, kind of adding, not insult to injury, but just suffering to injury or injury to suffering, was despite the fact that much of Europe was free, Poland was given to communist Russia. And so we have the whole history of the Iron Curtain that took place, splitting Eastern Europe from Western Europe. And so we get people like Ronald Reagan, right, who, let's take down this wall. The wall which separated West Berlin from East Berlin, you know, he was able to finally help take that down. But there's this incredible history of Catholicism and how John Paul II helped to just help the people in Poland who were striving for a movement in solidarity to kind of break out. And I guess consequence of that was just to become a free country again. So John Paul II grew up with many different Jewish friends, and then many of them were sent to concentration camps. So that was part of his upbringing. Can't even imagine. Then during the occupation itself, he avoided having to enlist by working in a stone quarry. And so in this stone quarry, he kind of began to better appreciate the dignity of work. He was also just reading many, many books at this time. The other workers there kind of saw him as a misfit there, accepted him, were grateful that he was there, encouraged him, but definitely actually encouraged him in his studies. You know, they knew that he kind of had a different calling than just being a stonemason for the rest of his life or working in a quarry. Towards the tail end of the war, of World War II, he actually entered an underground seminary. And I mean, that sounds super cool, but I'm sure they had their own stress levels and things they were dealing with. That's a tough spot to be in. Yeah, John Paul II, he's, at this point, he wasn't even John Paul II, he was just Karol Wojtyła. Karol Wojtyła. Sometimes people say Wojtyła, but it's no Wojtyła, it's an L with a kreska on it. So after World War II, like I said, Poland didn't get to experience the freedom of that so many other countries were experiencing. Poland entered the government of just a communist-run government. And over the course of 40 years, that government continued to, to be the functioning body. Yeah. So, and it's over that time period that John Paul II starts doing things like, within his own capacity, he does what he can. And so he does things like środowisko, which was exertions for the young people. And this was important because this was a time in Poland where the faith was very much oppressed. You had cities, idealist cities being built, like Nowa Huta in Poland, which is just outside the city of Kraków. That's actually where my dad grew up. But in that city that was being constructed, it was a city without God. And this is something that later in his bishopric, when he was bishop, he helped to construct a church in this district. And I went to go visit it. I won't say it's pretty, but you know what? That church means so much more than its architecture, because in building it, I mean, I guess just to put it bluntly, there was so much opposition there. But they erected a cross first, and they continued to celebrate a few years of Christmas masses, literally under the floodgates of the trucks of the authorities, until finally they're able to build this church. And if you go inside, yeah, like I said, the architecture is kind of interesting. These exertions he would go on with the young people. He would do things like, go on kayaking trips and all of that. Just to provide an opportunity for something that was very much lacking at the time, an opportunity for young Catholics to be together, and just to be able to talk, even to feel human again, just to kind of revitalize that dignity that they have. So those are some things he did. And then later, and this is something I guess that's preserved in the generational history again, but like when he was bishop, sometimes he would attend gatherings of youth. So these larger gatherings. And my dad was actually a part of some of those. And it's interesting to hear my dad talk about that, because he said that by his presence, Bishop Wojtyła was actually protecting them by simply attending. Because obviously these types of gatherings were not necessarily within, not the consent, but weren't on the same train of thought as the political authority at the time. So fast forward a little bit, John Paul II becomes Pope. And it's at this time that the Solidarność movement in Poland really starts to, make some waves, I think. Lech Wałęsa was the main leader of that particular movement. And he organized different types of strikes, and among the different workers for the different companies, and just helped to have a united front in that. He was really the voice. There was another voice, which I'm trying to remember his name, but he has this amazing song, which I really loved and tried to replicate. Let me look at the name of it really quickly. Never mind. Anyway, but it's like bring down these walls. That's one of them. And then the other one is the second song, which I really love. It says, he's kind of talking about himself. And in that song, he's saying, there was just one voice of one musician who tries to, tell people that the dawn is near. And then towards the end of the song, it says that, and then there were more voices and more voices and more voices until finally there was a whole multitude. But then again, it ends on that sorrowful note. And this was really sorrowful note that they're still experiencing those chains. So you have some of that music that's associated with it, with that particular artist. Then you have Lech Wałęsa. You have John Paul II, which comes into play. So he kind of encouraged some of this movement, but within his capacity. Talk about someone with a capacity. But he wanted to visit Poland. And at first, the authorities did not want him to do this, obviously. But he was able to, I think, negotiate earlier in the spring of 1981, a 3-day visit. But then later, for some reason, that didn't necessarily wasn't going to work out, and so there was actually a trade that happened. Instead of doing 3 days in the spring, doing 9 days later in the year. And what ended up happening was phenomenal. Wherever John Paul II went, throughout Poland, all of the different places of Poland, massive gatherings of people would congregate and to attend his masses. And what would John Paul II share? He would share a message of faith. That's really all he did. Just a message of faith and that God is bigger. There were others in lieu or in lead up. One of the other ones is Blessed Jerzy Popiełuszko. So Blessed Jerzy Popiełuszko was a Catholic priest at the time, and he was really involved more in the beginning of this movement, even before it came officially Solidarność. And he would provide masses for the workers, the Catholic workers, and he would and it was simple as that, actually. And but people came from all over to listen to his preaching, and he gave them so much hope. His story ends awfully, absolutely awfully, because he ends up being this martyr. He is just turning too many heads as far as the communist government at the time went, and so they literally got rid of him. They tailgated his car when he was on the way, and in the night, they beat him literally to a pulp. You wouldn't want to see pictures of his face. And then dumped him in the river. And then a couple days later, his body was found. Literally a martyr. He's a blessed. So, then you have John Paul II, who I think the same year becomes a living martyr. In St. Peter's Square, the day was May 13th. I'm getting some sort of dates here confused, my years exactly. I guess the only thing I need to check is exactly which year he went to go visit Poland, and then exactly which year the assassination attempt happened. But the assassination attempt on his life happened May 13th of 1981. And right there in St. Peter's Square, 2 bullets were fired, and I actually got to go see the spot. So if you go to St. Peter's Square in Rome, there's this brick there, and it says, this is where John Paul II was shot. I also got to see the place where he was first taken before he went to the hospital. So I was with, it was with World Youth Day. I was with my group, and we had our conventional Franciscan leader there. He's so awesome. And he told our group to shrink. Shrink, guys, don't look like a big group. And so he was able to get us past the Swiss guards into Vatican City State. And we got to go to the conventional Franciscan house, which is there. And that was actually the first place that John Paul II went before he was wheeled out to the hospital. And it was there that the medics were first able to at least do what they could for him to get that initial bleeding stopped. So, yeah, John Paul II was just this living martyr. And he attributed his recovery to the Blessed Mother. He said that one hand shot the bullet and the other guided it. Our Lady kind of pushed it away. And literally, that bullet went, I think, just a few millimeters from one of the main arteries. Had it just went to the side just a little bit more, he literally would have bled to death. He hardly survived as it was. So he recovers, and it just becomes this incredible witness. It's just unbelievable witness, continuing to do World Youth Days all over, whatever. John Paul II, he is the man. He is the great, and it's awesome that he is a saint. Absolutely awesome. Yeah, and there's just this one other idea that I kind of think of in the context of John Paul II, is like, what can we do? Obviously, John Paul II had this incredible capacity. Oh, he's the Pope, right? He can do what he can. I don't know, what do you say? He can influence everything, and he has got all the power, right? But there's this one idea that I remember learning within the context of John Paul II's life and his teachings on social justice. It's the idea of subsidiarity. And this is kind of where all of us come into play. As a church, but also in our lives, or even just across the board in whatever jobs we have. And subsidiarity is this idea that those within authorities have certain responsibilities. And it's not just that idea, but it's that you should turn to people who are in appropriate authority for whatever it is your concern or issue, whatever you're dealing with. So if you're a husband and a father, you have a responsibility toward your family in many, many different capacities and needs, whether it's just to love your children, to love your wife, to provide food for your family, to provide housing, clothing. All these types of things are super important. And so if your kid, needs something, if your kid is hungry, if your kid is growing up and they need clothes, they ought to turn to you in that need. Sounds super obvious, right? And so that's just kind of the idea. And that's the one thing I wanted to bring to you is like, okay, John Paul II, within his, we look at his life and it's amazing what he did, right? And we think of the saints as somehow these far off examples of impossible heroism and sanctity, when that's really not the case. Being all of us are capable of sanctity, and all of us are responsible within our own capacities in life for different things, and we all can kind of grow in that. Anyway, I hope you liked this video, and if you want to see more like it, don't forget to subscribe. But JP2, such an incredible witness to just vigor for life and just overcoming almost insurmountable obstacles, insurmountable except for God, and such an awesome witness to hope.